Hey everyone, it's Will, the host of the Everyman Drummer podcast, the one that you can listen to on Spotify, Stitcher, Pocket Casts, Apple Podcasts, all of those other podcast places. But here's the best part. You're probably wondering, how am I getting it distributed? Well, I'm here to tell you that, and you have to check it out. Anchor.fm, or even downloading the Anchor app on Android and Apple iOS systems right there. It's so easy that anybody can use it to start their own podcast. Hell, even me, a drummer, can use it to start their own podcast. And the best thing, check this out, the best thing about using this app, you guessed it, it's free. And they also help you distribute your podcast against all the other platforms that are being used today for everybody to get their podcast listened to out there. So I encourage you guys, check it out. If you really want to get a podcast started, use Anchor.fm. It's the only one that I use. I know there's other hosting sites out there, but this one is absolutely 100% free. You just need your email address, and you got to have a cool voice to use it. Maybe, but who knows? But you all get the point of it. It's really easy to get it started, and check it out on Anchor.fm. And welcome to the Everyman Drummer podcast. I'm your host, Will, and if you guys notice, now we have intro music. I recorded that a couple nights ago. Just a quick little intro groove to give a little bit of a spice to introduce everybody to what's going on now. Now that we're moving up into we're up at episode 5 now, and figured it's time to add a little more spice to it, and let's, add a little more inviting on there. So today, let's just talk about the difference between cheap drums and expensive drums. It was inspired by a YouTube video I was watching earlier today by Rob Brown. He did a thing on comparisons of cheap snare drums versus expensive snare drums, and he felt the same way that I do about it. And when it comes to your gear, I guess it's really up to the player if they want to spend all that type of money on gear and thinking that it's going to help them sound good. In my opinion, and from what I've seen and what I've heard, it really doesn't matter how much you spend on your gear. That's just my opinion. That's my take on it all. He felt the same way about what he was doing a comparison on a $60 snare drum versus his $900 Dave Weckl snare drum, and the $60 snare drum that Rob did was a CB percussion snare drum that he bought under $100, and then he tuned it up to his liking, and he compared it to his more $900 Dave Weckl metal drum. And in all reality, when it comes down to when you're spending that much type of money on gear, this is just my opinion on it. And what it comes to is you're getting all the bells and whistles, all the fun stuff. Yeah, you're probably paying for the name as well. And I guess to a lot of guys, the name is what, the names sell. And not gonna lie, the name sells. I do own one of my favorite brands to play, and I've been playing that brand for quite a long time now, almost 20 years. Has been the Pacific Drums brand alongside with the DW brand. I have never changed my gear. I'm still using my DW 5000 double pedal. This is the one without the hinge, without the Delta hinge, that I got back in 1996, and that's the quality of DW stuff. So you're now here's where that's going to come into. You're going to pay for what you get. Back then, that pedal was still retailing at about $350, I believe, and today it's upgraded, a little bit more with a bigger heel pedal on the back. It's got the square heel versus the original circle heel, which was based off of that Camco pedal from the 70s and 80s. Mine has the circle, the rounded heel without the Delta hinge. And again, this retailed back in 96, 97 for roughly about $350. It still goes for that today. That's for the craftsmanship and the quality. So this is where buying cheap gear and buying expensive gear is this is where it's going to come into hand. It's going to come into the eye of the beholder right there. Now you've all heard you pay for what you get. You know, obviously if the cheaper stuff is going to be made, it's going to be made, I don't want to say it with poor quality. Sometimes you buy cheaper stuff and it outlasts some of the stuff that you buy that's expensive. I'll give you an example. I have several snare drums in my collection, and one of my snare drums is a El Cheapo, and it happens to be one of my favorite snare drums. It's been recorded on several records that I've done with Michael Charles and Majesty, and that snare drum has the right amount of attack for me. And all I did was change the drum head, the batter head, and the resonant head. Tightened up the snares, tuned it up, gave it to my likening on the tuning on the batter side, and we went from there, and it made it on a record. And that snare drum was from an old Premier Olympic drum set, which at Guitar Center at the time. I got it, and it was like $200-$300 for the entire set. It was a 5-piece set with the popular shells. I love that kit. That kit was awesome. And again, that was another one of those kits that you buy when you're in an intermediate level and that you're using an entry level kit because it's your first brand new kit. You don't want to you can't really afford the big names of the time. And at the time I was going for a Tama kit, which was it was one of the early Art Stars. It was one of the Tama Star drum kits. It was one of the early ones back in '92. One of it had you had the popular wood shell, and then on the bass drum it had the metal hoop on there. It was a very nice kit. It retailed roughly about $500 at the time, and just standard 5-piece kit. And then when I left, when we were heading out, I saw the Premier for $200 cheaper. And we ended up getting that one. And I like Premier products. I've played Premier products, and I've always liked them. I've always had a keen eye for my dream drum set would be the Premier Janista, if they even still make it, even in vintage or an older Janista Premier drum kit. They just are beautiful drum kits. I'm not going to complain about the kit that I play now. It's survived everything, and I like to look at those other kits, the newer ones, and just lust over them because we know of what it means for that. But back to the cheaper stuff. So with the Premier kit, it was like all I did on that kit after a few, the regular stock heads, it's amazing what changing drum heads can do. You clean the edges off. You change the heads, you tune it to your specs, and it's just fantastic. The kit sounds like $1 million after that. Now, there's going to be people out there that agree with me or will choose to disagree or whatever. Oh, man, you got to go for this one with all the bling and blah, 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 blah. Not necessarily if you know how to play the instrument, and that's where Rob Brown was coming to the point with the snare drum. It can be a cheap snare drum, and if you tune it and change the heads and you tune it correctly and you know how to play, you're going to make that $60 snare drum sound like a $2,000 snare drum. And that's what the point of today's little discussion is about. If you know how to play your instrument, you're going to make that instrument sound just as great as the more expensive, highly desirable instruments that the pros play. I was having this discussion with my daughter yesterday, and I've always played more of the intermediate kits. I've never owned a professional sounding kit. Would I care to like to have one in the future? Sure I would. But is it really important? It is, and it kind of isn't. I like my kit. I know what it does. I know the specs of it. It's almost like it becomes part of you. I've already changed heads on it just to make them sound exactly the way that I like them to sound, and that's what it comes out. It's all personal. It comes to whatever sound that you're looking for. It becomes part of it's an extension of you. So with my current set which is a Pacific Drums C Series kit released back in 2000, 2001, right around there. It's got the all maple shells on there, and at the time it sounded pretty good at the time. Now I can say it sounds pretty damn good after the couple of facial changes that I've made to it. It's still got its black wrap on there and the chrome hardware. The heads I've changed already a couple times, from going from clear G2 Evans drum heads to now I am using G12 coated on all of the toms, except for the bass drum. The bass drum is, I want to say it's an EC3 on the batter, but changing drum heads and cleaning off the edges does make a difference, and especially if you tune it and if you know what you're doing. If you know what you're doing with the instrument, you're going to make it sound good. That's the bottom line, is you're going to make it sound good. I forgot who said it, but somebody said something about Buddy Rich, that he can make a set of trash cans sound like $1 million drum set, and it all comes down to the player. And that's what this whole thing is about. You can spend the money on the more high-end, expensive gear, but in the long run, if you don't know how to play, it's not going to sound like what you thought it would sound. You know, if you take the intermediate gear and you change it up and spruce it up, you'll make that cheaper drum set or a cheaper guitar or whatever it is that you're playing. You're going to make it sound like the ones that are, the top of the line stuff, the ones with all the bells and whistles, all the bling. It's like buying a car. Do you really need all that bling? Or is it more of a convenient? Is it more of a status? Hey, look at me. I'm playing this guitar with all of this blah, blah, blah. Or I'm playing this drum set that's got 25 karat gold on there. And, good for you. But can you play it? That's the bottom line. And that was the whole thing. He did this. Rob Brown did the comparison with the snare drums. That cheap snare drum sounded really, really good. I'm not gonna lie. And it's just like my cheap snare drum. I changed drum heads on there, tune it to my liking, get everything set the way it is, and man, oh man, does it sound! It kicks more than some of the other drums. I'm telling you right now, the cheap snare drum that came with that Premier kit, it's been recorded more than my Slingerland vintage snare drum or my other Ludwig vintage snare drum, both of those from the 50s, and one of them is from the 60s. This little cheapo metal Premier beginner drum snare drum has been recorded more, even more than my Pacific drum kit snare drum, and that's my go-to. That's my favorite snare that I like to use. I like to use that one, but I always fall back to this cheap Premier snare drum. It's just your typical aluminum shelled metal drum, and it has the right amount of tack that I'm looking for. It has the right amount of punch. It cuts through the mix. I usually take it on live, but if we're taking pictures with the kit, that's when I like to keep everything the same. But in the studio, I will take, 2 snare drums with, and a lot of the time, a lot of the people will go for the cheaper one because it just sounds better. And that just comes to show that if you know what you're doing with the instrument, there's really going to be no difference. So, so the expensive one has the fancier hardware, the fancier throw off. But if you don't know how to use that stuff, if you don't know how to hit the drum properly, if you don't know how to tune it properly, you know what? That $900 snare drum, $3,000 snare drum is going to sound worse than a $60 snare drum, in my opinion. So that's where that comes into effect with the drum set in general. The most expensive piece on my drum kit sitting right now is my DW pedal. And some things that have a lot of moving parts, you want to spend that to get a little bit of higher quality craftsmanship in there, because you don't want it to break on a gig or in a recording session if it comes down to that. But yeah, you spend the money where you need it to spend. Usually, in my opinion, the most expensive pieces of drum set or in the layout of your drum kit should be your hi-hats and your ride. In my opinion, those are like the putter of your golf bag. Those two should be the most expensive. Some people will argue and say, well, the snare drum should be expensive. Yeah, it probably should. But again, if you know how to tune it, if you know how to get it to sound right, you're going to make that cheaper snare drums sound really damn good. And that's what it comes down to. You got to know how to play the instrument. And if you don't know how to play the instrument, then you're probably going to have some problems later on. Not out there. Anybody, if you have a good ear, if you have a good tone for everything, if you have a good, keen eye on what you're doing with the instrument, you're going to make it sound great. And that's what it really comes down to. A lot of my gear, like I've said, the most expensive piece that I have, and I pride myself on it because it's 20 years old, and it's more than 20 years old, 25 years old, and it still rocks. It hasn't not broken. It has not let me down on the road or in the studio. And that is my DW 5000 pedal right there. And it's just a wonderful pedal. And that's one that I'd say you should spend money on at least a couple things. But in the grand scheme of things, if you really like the sound of an intermediate kit, go for it. You can make that kit sound even better just by changing some heads on there, by tuning it up a little bit differently. You can make it sound really good. That's what we're at with this episode today, and it was just the comparison of cheaper and more expensive gear, and that's what in my experience, that's what I've experienced. Playing some of those more expensive stuff, and honestly, that's when I've played some of the more expensive stuff, it's just like, it sounds just like my other kit, Then maybe my ears are bad, but I don't know. That's probably another episode that's a discussion for something else. But that's you're the drummer out there, you're the musician, you make the call. If you feel like you should spend all the money in the world on your equipment because you can make it, because you think it's going to make you a better player, then that's up to you. But if you're in a regular, if you're just out there to just play and then make a name for yourself, and then make a name for yourself by actually using, gear that you're comfortable with, and you can make that gear sound like $1 million, then by all means go for it. That's who we are as individuals, and what we bring to the table when it comes to playing the instrument. That's our own personal taste on it. So that's really where I stand on the cheaper versus the more expensive stuff. We all like to have the more expensive stuff, but if you can make that cheaper stuff like the expensive stuff, then you're gonna be golden right there. That's going to bring it to the end of this show. Sorry, it's a little bit quick on this one, but that was my opinion, and I got inspired by watching Rob Brown. Check him out on YouTube. He's got a lot of valuable stuff, valuable information out there as well. Doing the like I said, this whole episode was inspired by his comparison of a cheap snare drum versus a very expensive snare drum. And it really comes down to, again, cheaper gear versus the more expensive gear. It's all about the person behind it. It's not the gear. You could be the crappiest player out there and you can have the most expensive guitar out there or drum set. But if you don't know how to play it, then the guitar is not going to play you to make you sound better. Now, and it's all about the player. That's what it comes down to. And we're not here to debate, well, this and that and this. It's really up to the player themselves. If you're good, you're good. And if you're not so good, we just got to work on things. That's what it comes. Just practice is what my advice is on that. But the debate on cheaper versus good on the more expensive gear, that's really a debate that I don't think will ever die. And that's my opinion, because people are going to swing one way and people are going to be swinging the other way. People are going to hit the middle. It's just one of those things that to me, it's more personal taste and also knowing how to play. That's going to do it for this episode. We will catch you next time. And until then, everybody, just be good and keep practicing, and we'll hope to hear you next time. Smash that like button and give it the ratings that you wish. Have any comments, feel free to tweet me at @TheRealWillGeronimo on Twitter. And any comments, and if you guys have any specific topics we want to talk about, shoot them my way and we'll do some research and I'll hit them next time. But until then, keep on drumming.